Thank you to the Baltimore Kohles. I was honored to be asked to be with you and to have this opportunity to provide the commentary on the Sunday Gospel this weekend. And then I realized that I was being asked to reflect on the narrative anticipating Jesus's return at the end times. And then I further realized that I would be offering this reflection after the election in the United States, quite possibly in the midst of chaotic aftermath in an election in which a president had already decidedly not agreed to a smooth transition of power, and a president who has a history of inciting violence. With this, and with the context of the total upheaval we've experienced in 2020 thus far, this invitation felt like a daunting task. So I looked, of course, to the gospel reading for reassurance and direction, and discovered that I was being asked to unpack the story of the wise and foolish virgins. It is a story that embraces dichotomies and seems altogether too comfortable with division. Furthermore, on the surface, it seems like Jesus tells people to take care of themselves and to look after their own interests. And his message is, don't share. This is the very opposite of what we expect from Jesus and what we need at this moment. In essence, I've been invited to reflect on a jarring narrative that draws us into pondering what it means to be wise and or foolish at this moment in history. And so we dive in. This gospel opens with a statement setting up the kingdom of heaven in comparison with the events that unfold in this story. What is meant by the kingdom of heaven? Only Matthew's gospel uses the term kingdom of heaven, and a word search of Matthew's gospel reveals that the phrase kingdom of heaven appears 32 times. Evidently, we are provided with many depictions of the kingdom of heaven. As it happens, the final reference to the kingdom of heaven appears in this narrative we ponder this afternoon. In summarizing a few of the other 32 examples of the kingdom of heaven, we learn that we are encouraged to repent and prepare for it. We learn that the kingdom of heaven is highly desirable, like a treasure in the field or a pearl of great price. We hear that it's for children, the poor in spirit, the persecuted for righteousness, and probably not the rich. It upends our expectations regarding who is invited and how they are treated. There's also a grand sorting involved in the kingdom of heaven. We hear about good seeds and weeds in the field, and good and bad fish. We discover people can be locked out or thrown out of the kingdom of heaven. Indeed, we see some of these same themes in today's reading. The division between wise and foolish is another kind of sorting. Those who are deemed foolish are locked out. Also, there's an overarching theme of preparedness involved here, sorting those who prepared from those who did not, applying the categorical labels of wise and foolish. This story of the wise and foolish virgins is also a parable. Parables are interesting and utterly subversive as a genre, and Jesus embraces them as he engages with the disciples and the crowds who come to hear his teaching. As we attempt to interpret and make sense of parables in our own time and place, we do not want to lock down their meaning. Instead, parables are intended to force us to think, consider, and be surprised. Parables are supposed to give us a jolt. We should not domesticate or tame them or think we know what they mean. Parables destabilize our thinking in order to get us to take another look at what we think we already know. The biggest jolt to our sensibilities here is that Jesus appears to be telling people not to share. At first glance, Jesus seems to be encouraging self-reliance, independence, or even selfishness. What happened to the compassionate Jesus we know and love? How can this message to condone stinginess come from Jesus, who has a deep concern for the poor, the Jesus who heals, and the Jesus who welcomes people back to the community? So we turn to take a closer look at some of the details of this parable. Although the version of the text that we read this afternoon translates these women as 10 bridesmaids, they are often considered, and in the Greek may more closely be considered virgins in the text. So although the text features characters, the wise and foolish virgins, this parable is not really about virginity. The setting is a wedding, yet the parable is also not really about weddings. One way we can tell this narrative is not actually about the wedding is that there's a fair amount of ambiguity around these women. Are they part of the bridegroom's household as they first appear to be when they are awaiting his return? But the bridegroom doesn't know them in the end, so are they instead relatives of the bride? This very ambiguity discourages readers from assigning clear allegorical roles for each of the characters. Yet Jesus does describe himself as a bridegroom elsewhere in Matthew 9, when he is questioned about his disciples' lack of fasting. So Jesus appears to be the one the early Christians hearing this parable are waiting for. Yet it is unclear as to whether these wise or foolish ones are known to the bridegroom or not. This lack of clarity destabilizes our expectations about the meaning of this story and prevents us from assigning only one possible meaning to it. According to Daniel Harrington, it is not unusual that a bridegroom would be delayed, as he might have to negotiate a dowry before bringing his bride home. Therefore, whomever these women are, this story seems to be about preparedness or lack of it. They should have known there might have been a delay. If they would have been prepared, they would have had enough oil. Never mind how logical it may or may not have been to attempt to purchase oil so late at night. These incidental details simply demonstrate that these are not the main issues at hand. So this parable implores early Christians to be prepared for Jesus' return. However, it does so by employing another tactic that is unsettling for us: division. Division is a little too close to home after the election week we have just had here in the United States. We now have a president-elect, finally. Despite Joe Biden's lead of over 4 million votes, the United States is a divided nation. We are red versus blue states, Democrats versus Republicans. East and West Coast versus flyover states, rural versus urban, Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter, to name a few of the divisions among us. The primary division here in our text today is between the wise and the foolish. But what does it mean to be wise, and what does it mean to be foolish? Most people probably think their viewpoints are completely logical, justifiable, and undoubtedly correct. Of course, we all want to be wise. Few people, if any, want to be considered foolish. However, we know all dichotomies show us that real life doesn't always fit into one of these two clear boxes. I know that I can be both wise and foolish within a span of 10 minutes. Furthermore, we know the unnecessary suffering that can occur by categorizing people into strict groups. Most people are more than one thing and do not fit neatly into a box. Furthermore, why must so many of these dichotomies I've listed be opposed to one another? I imagine that we can agree with relative ease that by affirming Black Lives Matter, one does not negate the value of anyone. I admit that I am experiencing some resistance to dividing wisdom and foolishness into two strict categories. For example, I might wisely choose to practice good self-care, eat well, and go for a walk. And then simultaneously, perhaps even while on my walk, I might foolishly agree to participate in too many presentations or projects in too short a time, thereby negating the self-care I attempted to employ. The parable immediately prior to the parable we read today is one about the servant who is either faithful or not, and is found working or not when the master returns. It could describe two possible behaviors by the same person or two different people. Just as this parable could describe faithfulness or unfaithfulness within the same individual, we also may consider the wisdom and foolishness in our lives. In Deuteronomy 30, Moses places two options before the people. I have set before you life and death, the blessing and the curse. Choose life then, that you and your descendants may live. We choose between life and death by our actions and our dedication to Yahweh. And so we are given another choice from Scripture of only two options. And this is again not the only example. Also in Psalm 1, we are told that the just are like a tree planted near running water, while the wicked are like chaff that the wind drives away. The Lord knows the way of the just, but the way of the wicked leads to ruin. We choose between behaving in a manner that is just or wicked here. And finally, wisdom literature may even be all the more pertinent to our gospel text today, as Proverbs 9 depicts the personification of wisdom and foolishness as Lady Wisdom and Lady Folly. Lady Wisdom builds her house, sets her table, offers wisdom, and encourages instruction. The imagery suggests abundance for those who dine with Lady Wisdom. Lady Folly invites the naive and senseless and suggests that stolen water tastes sweet. Perhaps we hear echoes of these personifications of Lady Wisdom and Lady Folly in today's parable about the wise and foolish virgins, as those who are wise are welcome to the feast with the bridegroom, and those who are foolishly unprepared attempt to gain oil that is not their own. In each of these cases, Deuteronomy, Psalms, and Proverbs, the presentation of two options encourages us to make a choice. It oversimplifies the choices and attempts to persuade us to make a particular right choice. In Deuteronomy, we are asked to choose between life and death. In the Psalm, the choice is between being just and enjoying fruitfulness of being planted near running water, or being wicked and being blown away. And finally, in Proverbs, the choice is between befriending Lady Wisdom and enjoying the abundance she provides, or choosing Lady Folly, which leads to Sheol, or the absence of God's presence. In each case, life and death, justice or wickedness, wisdom or folly, are presented as two distinct options. We may choose one or the other. In actuality, we all probably choose them all at some point. Finally, setting up a clear dichotomy with an obvious best choice is an attempt to persuade us to take the right or desirable path. Who wants death, wickedness, or folly when we could have life, justice, and wisdom instead? Yet, by forcing a choice between only two options, we are invited to consider whether we are actually choosing life, justice, and wisdom in our lives. The reduction of our options to either wise or foolish just might make me squirm. Is the current path I am on really more wise than foolish? I cannot hedge so easily and convince myself that I'm mostly good, usually prepared, or often wise if my choices are so clear-cut. Being sometimes wise and prepared suggests that I am sometimes foolish and unprepared. The choice requires introspection of us. So when we turn to our parable of the wise and foolish virgins, some prepared and some unprepared, we are now invited to examine our lives anew. Ultimately, it is the nature of parables to raise more questions than answers. So what do we do with all of this? Are we prepared? Do we have enough fuel for the waiting we have in store for us? Perhaps part of the lesson here is that there are some things that no one else can do for us. We cannot simply wait around and rely on someone else to give us the oil or the solutions we need. For instance, this election has revealed that the deep divisions among us are not going away. We cannot simply vote them away, or march them away, or post snarky Facebook comments until they go away. Hard work is needed to heal the divisions among us, to build relationships with people who are different than us. And so, in light of our reflection this afternoon, I leave you with these questions. What does it mean to be wise individually? What does it mean to be wise collectively as we await the hour that is upon us? Thank you.